Kia ora tātou, tuatahi ngā mihi nui ki ngā mana whenua o tēnei rohi, ko Te Atiawa, ko Ngāti Toa, ko Taranaki whānui hoki, ai Tuarua, ngā mihi nui ki ngā ringa toi, mō tō mahi toi, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on this dreary day, but we've got some really awesome kai kōrero, some really awesome speakers and artists who are here to have a kōrero about Whenua Ūkaipō, to talk about lots of different lenses that we might take to sustainability and this whole kaupapa of Whenua Ūkaipō and what that means. So I just started off with a little karakia, which talks about, settling down and preparing for things that might come, and just also acknowledge the mana whenua of this land in which we stand, Taranaki whānui, Te Atiawa, and Ngāti Toa. And just said a massive thank you to our artists, also a massive thank you to the organisers of this awesome exhibition, this awesome kaupapa, and to you all for joining us here tonight to share this taonga that we're about to be blessed with. So just a bit of a kōwaio, who am I? My name is Tamitha Pō, he uri ahau no Ngāti Awa no Waikato Taunui hoki. My name's Tam, so I'm a local councillor here in Wellington. And I descend from Ngāti Awa and Waikato Taunui, which are not local iwi here, but nevertheless, here I am. I represent rangatahi mostly, but do a lot of other things on the side, but I have the privilege of facilitating this kōrero tonight. So I guess I'm going to leave you to introduce yourselves in however way or form you feel most comfortable doing. But I'll pass it to my left over to Piri to have a bit of a kōrero about anything that you feel comfortable doing. Kia ora.
Mauri ora ki te whare. Nei rā te mihi mai oha kia koutou. Tēnā koe i te kaikarakia i tēnei ahi pō. Tēnā hoki kia koe me tō mihi me te manaakitanga kia mātou ngā kaitoi. Tēnā rawa atu koe. I just wanted to, of just acknowledging in support of Tamitha for starting, opening the evening, our wā kōrero tonight. Ko wai au, he uri ahau no Kāi Tahu, no Puke te raki ki te tonga, I te taha tōku māma, no te tai tokerau, no Ngāpuhi nui tonu Ngāti Kahu hoki. Ko Piri Cowie ahau, he kai mahi toi au, he tautiaki toi hoki. Just linking that my whānau from the deep south and also from the far north around the Hokianga region. I'm an artist and I also wear the Pautiaki toi potai. Ai, ka waihoi kone. Tira pia ka paku kōrero au I waku mahi, waku kaupapa, e pāne ki te kaupapa o te pōnei, wahine toa. Just going to give a little kōrero and then I think pass it on to our whānau here. The kaupapa this evening was one of the key kaupapa was about wahine toa, or mana wahine. And I think within our arts, if we're particularly looking at that, ka hoki aku mahara ki ngā whaia I tū kaha I mui a mātou. I just want to acknowledge the total, the support we've had, especially from Toi Māori, who've helped us with this exhibition here, and those our leaders, our toa, our rangatira who've gone before, from Whaiawana Davis and Colleen Ehrlich, Whai Kath Brown, and all of our whānau that are still leading the way in terms of, especially our taha wahine. I also want to acknowledge some of the kōrero as well, that it's also really important to have, as much as we have our taha wahine, that's, kia taurite, te taha tāne, that within our culture it's also really important to have that balance of our taha wahine and our taha tāne. And that's something that I really wanted to bring within our exhibition, is that feeling of having the male and the female energy within this whare and being in balance. And, that everybody has a role to play in terms of leadership, and especially you'll see that within the marae context. there's always a place for everyone's voice in those spaces. I'm just going to share one image today, because I'm really actually keen to hear everybody else's kōrero, so I'm going to keep my notes in short. But I just wanted to share one of the images I sent through. This is some of my mahi that I've been involved in, and I think a lot of our kōrero that we've had over the week is really about ka rakatahi, our rangatahi, and I think it's critical and it's becoming more and more relevant is how do we engage our rangatahi in these issues around sustainability and te taiao. And one of the key ways that we do back home is trying to engage our rakatahi in wānaka reo, so attending wānanga reo, but also mahinga kai. Mahinga kai is a space where we honour and celebrate our traditional customary food gathering practices. And I think just touching on some of the kōrero we heard throughout the day today from our previous speakers, it's really about experiencing manaakitanga and creating those spaces and time where whānau can share kai, be involved in gathering kai, ealing, just being in te taiao. And I think when you get into those spaces of actually being able to go, away from the screen and just looking at pictures, but actually go into the bush and gather your kai, or go to the moana and be in those spaces, I think that's where you can really build that feeling of belonging, connecting, but more you kind of touch on the experiences of your tupuna. And so I really want to celebrate those, where it's possible, those opportunities to whakanui, to celebrate our taiao. So this is a project that I was involved in a couple of years ago in Ōtautahi. It's actually called Mauri Moana. It came through an experience of my daughter experiencing negative comments in her school about her appearance. And I thought, because her nose was too big, and my hair's all frizzy. It's just general issues about identity and being in a space where she's a minority, and all the images you're seeing on the screen is not looking like her. She's not seeing those images, and I just thought we need to see as something that we, in terms of working with other artists, landscape architects, is we need to see our faces in our places, in our spaces. And so this was a way that I could bring her. This is a project, a billboard that was in Christchurch, Hagley Park, that people could drive by daily. But it's really to whakanui ngā āhuatanga, ka kite, etahi āhuatanga o tō tātou kanohi Māori. We're Polynesian people. She's going, oh, Mum, my hair's too frizzy. I said, well, ka aroha. My hair's too frizzy. I said, baby, you're Polynesian, darling. Kia tāhua. She goes, oh, my nose is too big. And I said, well, it's perfect for a hongi. And she goes, my kauai, my chin is too long. I said, it's meant to have a moko kauai. Āte wā ka hiahia koe. So I think it's really important to, where we can, uplift our people, and especially our rangatahi when they're going through that transition from childhood into adulthood. So this stood in Hagley Park as a project with Skate Public Art for a season of 8 weeks. And so we got a lot of feedback from local people just saying how much they enjoyed seeing those positive images in a space that you traditionally wouldn't see our faces. But Mauri Moana, and ka whakanui te tuna. So that the tuna endemic to New Zealand. And kia tātou. So anei ngā wahine toa, o ngā tau e hara mai ana. Nō reira, koina. Aronga mai ahua roa tēnā. Kia ora koutou. Ka kua te rākau ki tēnei wahine toa ki tōku tā.
Mālole soifua e mama, e langi. Kia ora koutou, talofa lava, buluvanaka, mālole lei, kia orana, whakalofa lahi atu, halo o kita. And it is beautiful to be here. I've just been in Ōtautahi at the Christchurch Word Festival, and indeed, 2 full schools programs, and kids are hungry and thirsty to reach out and touch the creatives in our society, the artists. And your daughter's school should definitely get class copies of Mophead, which is a graphic mini memoir that I published, and it's touched something among our people. Our faces in all places, up and down and all around, that this should be the norm, that these noses should be the norm, that the skin colour is the norm, and to be valued. Yeah. So I hear her and I feel her, and the mail that I get from all ages up and down Aotearoa attest to the fact that people have been hungry to see themselves and difference celebrated in a unique way. Not just kind of quietly sitting there in the periphery, but in the mainstream, in big global platforms, unapologetically standing there. So I want to thank Jill for the initial invitation and the coffee and the gorgeous lunch here at a Wellington cafe some months ago when she invited me. So thank you also to Piri and Simon and the numerous people who have gone into putting together this extraordinary exhibition. So I'm a poet. My name is Selina Tusitala Marsh. And I'm a poet and an academic. I teach post-colonial literature at the University of Auckland. But, you know, and one of the things I got to do as a Commonwealth poet in 2016 was to write and perform a poem for the Queen. And I did so, and it was a hoot. It's documented in my second graphic mini-memoir, Mophead 2, which is out next week, 2 being spelt T-U, and it's all about how where we stand makes the difference. But there was a conversation I had with the Duke of Edinburgh, and I had just performed this huge poem in Westminster Abbey, and I was the only 6-foot Samoan with big hair and a bright blue pulatasi on. And when I met him, he said to me, I said, "Greetings, Your Royal Highness." He said, "Yes, what do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm a poet, I just performed back there." And he said, yes, but what do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm a lecturer at the University of Auckland in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and I specialise in post-colonial literature." To which he responded, "Post," and then he walked off. So he gave me the best line for a story, right? Because in so many ways, there are many people who don't feel that we're actualised in a post-colonial era, and indeed we're not. So when I was given the brief of Wahine tour and an Indigenous woman's perspective on sustainable development, it made me really nervous. Because as an artist and a creative, you know, I use my art just to feel through everything. Because I spend a lot of my working day critiquing and taking apart literature and critics and research, and I'm like, oh man. But poetry is the way that I connect ideas with people. And so I made 2 poems for this panel. The first is based on the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and, you know, like zero hunger, no poverty, good health and well-being, and they're all on those really colourful squares that you get given at the entrance. But to me, these were all empty. I'm like, well, they're so abstract, I need to concretise this so I can engage. So this, the title of this poem is a quote from Marianne Williamson. "Every problem emerges from the false belief we are separate from one another. Every answer emerges from the realization we are not. Every empty mouth, every roofless house, every hungry thought, every book unbought, every clotted heart, every false start, every innocent dead, every paper shred, every tree cut, every ignored gut, every closed eye, every smoking sky, every burned hand, every scarred land, every silenced vowel, every abuse of power, every drowned fish, every justice wish list is born from the belief we are separate from one another. But every full mouth, every roofed house, every flowering thought, every book taught, every blooded heart, every new start, every innocent alive, every paper archived, every tree grown, every gut a backbone, every opened eye, every cleared sky, every held hand, every green land, every loud vowel, every shared power, every flying fish, every justice kiss emerges from the realization we are not separate from one another. Kia ora. Poets like claps, I'm just saying. And so here's another poem. It's called the Not poem. So this is not a poem about climate change or global warming, extreme weather intensification warning, greenhouse gases or fossil fuel combustion, rising sea levels or coral erosion. This is not a poem about ecosystem collapse or ocean acidification, biodiversity loss or habitat destruction, ice sheet melt or glacial retreating, fish stock decline or coral bleaching. This is not a poem about freshwater loss or desertification, sea level rising or deforestation, coastal submersion or crop failure, pest propagation or disease carriers. This is not a poem about flooding on farmland and human migration, war or conflict or species extinction, the crisis on sustainable development, CO2 levels or disaster risk management. This is not a poem about risk sharing or early warning systems, post-disaster recovery or superbug resistance, government institutional capacity, social opposition to adaptive perspicacity. This is a poem about the Allah, the way, the Allah, the path, the Allah, the bridge, the Allah, the route, the Allah, the conduit, the Allah, the line, the Allah, the channel, the Allah, the trail, the Allah, the road, the Allah, the track, the Allah, the link, the Allah, the tie, the Allah, the bond. This is a poem about love, 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 love.
Okay, follow that. I'm just going to say in a very English way, thank you so much for the invitation to be part of this, all of you who've invited me here. I'm English, have lived for 30 years in the Outer Hebrides in Scotland with my husband as a vet. He was the vet, I was the artist. I became an artist on the islands, having previously milked cows in Somerset and Victoria in Australia and in Holland. And I had an opportunity to learn about art on the islands as an arts course developed. So over a period of about 10 years, I got my undergraduate in art and fine art, went on to do a master's in Dundee University and a PhD there. I was born in London, very much a city girl, but I left home as soon as I could and went to work on a farm. And the whole experience of rural life started to open up to me, and I began to learn so much more about the world, but also about myself in that place. And when we settled in the Outer Hebrides, it hadn't been a plan. We'd gone there for Gert's first job for 8 months and found that the place had found us, and the experience of being there and being with the people who live there, this very much a long-established community. People had lived on these islands for 4,000 years. And understanding how to live in a place with very poor soil, very bad weather, very long winters, and actually learn what community was. Because growing up in a city, particularly a place like London, such a huge city full of so many dislocated people, it was an absolutely remarkable opportunity, first of all to be there, but then find a way to stay there. And in the process, become an artist. So the way I lived there partly was as I started to grow plants because plant nurseries didn't exist, and it was a job that I could do. It turned out to be a place where there were no dairy farms, so I couldn't actually do the job that I had trained for. And over several years, developed a lot more knowledge about how to grow our own food, but learning from the people who live there how to do that. And in the last 4 years, through the research that I started to undertake, I ended up delivering, being a project leader on a Climate Challenge Fund project, which was funds created by the Scottish Government and given directly to communities across Scotland to find ways to actually reduce their carbon emissions directly in the places where those communities lived, and to actually be delivered by those communities. So the process of navigating project plans and project funds and organisations who oversee how those funds will be administered, it was interesting to be there in that space and understand that actually, even though those funds are there for those communities to use to benefit them and to find ways to actually respond to reducing carbon emissions, that actually those communities had very little say in how those funds were spent. So I think my capacity as an artist, rather than a project manager, enabled me to open up the development of those projects. And over a course of 4 years, the focus shifted from the benefits to the organisations to actually build their infrastructure and their ways of meeting the community, to actually involving the community as co-managers of the projects by using a series of processes that I think are very much built around art practice. So I'm going to read them because I can't remember them. And I can't see if I don't put my glasses on. So the first point was that the project had to tap into a need. And the way to understand what the need of the community is to actually ask them. And the plan was not just to deliver project outcomes, but to actually attempt to reinvigorate that community knowledge around the subject of climate change mitigation. So in the process of asking the community what they wanted, it actually positioned the social communication, exchange and interaction as a vital method. The second thing was to initiate intergenerational communication through those project outcomes, using methods that required young people to ask older people what they knew, which was an attempt to prioritise lived experience, the value of lived experience, and link it to rebuilding a sustainable society. The third thing was to recognise local, place-based knowledges, and to do that by recording and documenting that local knowledge in some form, visual, written publications. And that was so that we would embody the subjective, connected, intra-dependent relationships linked to environment and place. Oops. The fourth method was to use a self-nomination format, which artists know very well. We constantly have to push ourselves forward and say what we can do and why what we know will fit in to whatever the requested format is. So using open call-outs and expressions of interest to enable individuals to identify their connection to the project, which actually built personal engagement, which was developed through the chance to adapt societal knowledges and behaviours. And in that process, organisations were then required to work under a more indeterminate and uncertain condition of, will people step forward? Will they have the skills? Will that money be spent well? Will the outcomes be created so that the funders will be satisfied? So that's also the step that the organisations had to take. But in the process, what was defined was what really mattered to the community. What also occurred then was clarity around responsibilities, which supported a greater mutual understanding between the organisations and communities about what and how benefits get delivered, which then alters the narrative of individual rationality and competition towards more meaningful collaboration. And the outcome is meaningful climate change adaptation, meaningful climate change engagement, which relates to local practices, local experiences, local materials, positioned within the lived experience and subjectivity of the community, using their own adaptive capacities that they have developed that enable them to survive in those places and sustain their communities over decades and centuries. So this process encourage people to draw from their known but undervalued practices, undervalued by others, but maybe sometimes also by the communities themselves. And then not needing to learn a whole new load of practices, new technologies, but actually draw deep down from what they already knew themselves. Sorry if that sounds a bit formal. I couldn't think how else to say it without drawing attention to those key things. Because what I think maybe I occupied a useful position between the community and the organisations coming in as an outsider. And it is difficult to fill that space, but actually sometimes it can be a useful position. So that's kind of what I wanted to say. I hope you don't mind. Okay. Yeah.
So, is that, yes. So, this has got to be a really kind of informal kōrero. I really just want to say that if you have any pātai or any questions, that there will be an opportunity for you to ask those. But I just wanted to offer some reflections on each of your kōrero, just really briefly. Piri, I loved your kōrero. I actually grew up in Christchurch till I was about 9, and walking to school had some really awful experiences of white supremacy and people saying things to me, and I can't, it just made me so happy to see this, and I think to 5 or 6 year old Tam and how that would have felt to see someone who looks like me on such a big platform. I think it's really powerful. Just wanted to thank you for that, and I love this kōrero about rangatahi and using the tai ao and our reconnecting with those indigenous ways of understanding our atua and our tai ao and all of Tāne's creatures within it to, I suppose, understand ourselves as well. And I had some question for you, but I'll just keep doing my round off. And Dr. Selina, I loved your poems. Thank you so much, and especially your kōrero that you had in at the Commonwealth thing or whatever, where that whole post-colonial thing was, really, really cool. And I especially liked your, I liked both your poems, but I really liked the second one because, so I've got the climate change portfolio for Wellington, and it's, yes,
do you want the poem? You have a copy
so I
of the
can
poem?
recite it because seriously, I get so lost in these terminologies, and it doesn't connect with people. It just doesn't get to that really human need for the environment to be healthy and to be thriving, and that's why I loved so much about that. I think it really got to that, and I'd love to hear some more about that later on. And Laura, thank you. So I love everything you said too, because that process that you just set out. I just finished a book chapter for this new BWB text that's coming out, which is all about living in the climate crisis, and I offered some of my thoughts about how we might be able to bring rangatahi, particularly young Māori and young Indigenous people along in terms of understanding and connecting to climate change in the way that you were talking about things like place-based knowledge and allowing people to ask questions, really having that really local and people-centred approach to the process. So I really appreciated that too, and having whakapapa to Scotland too, I really appreciated hearing some more about our culture or our history as well. So I suppose if anyone wanted to reflect further, the floor is open.
Kia ora. Ka tautoko hoki au I ngā mihi ko mihia. Kia tata, can you hear me? Just really exciting. Tēnā koe mō kōrero reka. Really, it's quite uplifting to hear different kupu in this space, especially when the language, the kaupapa of this kōrero, we are saying, he ha te kai a te rangatira, he kōrero, he kōrero, he kōrero. And ki roto I tēnei whare, we're just saying, what is the food of leaders and chiefs? And it is discussion, it's discourse, it's poetry, it's a visual feast, and that's what we're having in this space, as well as being able to experience performances. So just ngā mihi, tino reka ki aku taringa. It's really sweet to my ears. It's great. And then Laura, when I was listening to you describe, he taha kōti mana hoki tāku, I also have Scottish whakapapa links, and so I'm kind of imagining, it's a great way to travel back to those spaces. And when you're talking about the transference of intergenerational knowledge, that's our connection here in terms of mahinga kai and trying to create those opportunities for our young rangatahi to put their feet back into our whenua and into the waters and have those create those experiences and connections to place. So tēnā hoki kia koe. So ngā mihi, koina, koina noi, tēnei wā.
Beautiful. Laura, thank you for your kōrero. I hope I wasn't being disrespectful by kind of doodling, that's just the way I know. And actually, I doodled something for your daughter to take away, because when we're dealing within huge systems and huge infrastructures, often in my line of work as a poet, it's one touch at a time, one change of perspective, one bestowal of confidence to young or old, right? That can often kind of seduce them into their own creative response in connection with what's going on in the world. So thank you for that. And I just think, I was thinking, I was running along New Brighton Beach this morning and 2 days ago, and it's a wicked beach. I come from Waiheke Island, and the beaches are pretty idyllic compared to that easterly wind that is constantly battering the coast. And running along, and I saw a Cadbury chocolate bar wrapper kind of half buried in the sand, and I was like, I am too cold and too tired to pick that up. And I ran, and then I stopped and I doubled back. Because it's like, if one runner picks up one thing, if one walker picks up one thing, right, then we might save one other thing. And so doubled back, and it kind of mirrored my own thinking process for that whole day about, we're too busy to stop and pick up the lapisi in the global village, right, to pick up the rubbish in the village. And then the challenge came then there was a bread bag, and then someone's frickin' shoe, and I'm like, really? If you start one thing, then it naturally avalanches, and then where do you stand? And when it becomes less convenient to stop and pick up the stuff, where do you stand? But to me, that's the space that, that irritation, or that irritation, like the oyster, the grit, builds around what eventually becomes, a pearl, a valuable pearl. And so that's that beautiful creative space. So when you're talking policy and the lines are so clear and the boundaries are so sharp and, kind of steely cornered, in comes creativity that hopefully shifts the spirit and the energy to doing something, even if it's one thing.
Well, I was really struck by the story of your daughter, because the reality is that she hasn't looked at you to see herself. It's that distraction of others, other faces, everything being presented, through technology, of some sense of how she feels she should look. Obviously, I've got a daughter who at the same age would have said exactly the same things about her own appearance. So there's also every teenage girl feels these things. But that faith and trust in where you're from is so vital, to be reinforced. And in the busyness of life, it gets forgotten. so, yeah, that's a challenge to us all, always. But what I loved about your final poem was that final sentiment of, encapsulated in love, that what totally binds communities, binds humanity, although we deny it and fight over it, is love. And that's the way we need to proceed from today. That's all we can do. Remember that. Yeah. Thank you.
Did anyone else have any reflections they might want to share, or some questions that they had for our artists tonight? Okay, that's all good.
I might just bring one thing and just to bring it back to our kaupapa and just really acknowledge, if we can have the image back of our kaupapa, just in terms of speaking about Whenua Ūkaipō, really we're coming back to Papa Tuanuku, in the end, our Earth Mother, and that's, our connection to, to her, to Te Aki Aia, to look after her. But I just wanted to speak a little bit about our image here, toa by our stunning artists, and he's had a big long day over there. Our toa by Pewhairangi Riddell no Ngāti Porou. But one of the pieces that resonated, one of the things that resonated with me in choosing this, this is our Pautoko Manoa for the exhibition, central post, is like when we look at that toa, that toa, this piece has the elements of te taha tāne me te taha wahine. And I think it's to remember that within all of us are those sides. We say our male side and our female side. And at certain times you need to draw on them to push through challenges, or maybe to take a gentler approach, or maybe, maybe that, there's multiple ways that we can stand together and, kia wero here, ngā wero. Just reflecting on some of the ways within our own community and how Wahine Māori may be able to put a voice forward in multiple ways, whether that's through karanga, but also just that whole manaakitanga that you feel from your whānau, your whaia, your tupuna. But I just wanted to bring it back to Papa Tuanuku, ko tātou whaia, but also the toa that we all have the opportunity to stand as a warrior, as a toa for our environment. And there's also the kaha of when we stand together as a rōpū. He whānau toa, he whānau toi, and that's where it all combined together, and that sometimes we do need to move together as an ope, as a group of warriors. But just wanted to acknowledge this piece, a toa within Ngāti toa. Kia ora koutou.
In response to gorgeous matua there, and linking with Papa Tuanuku, I'll just finish my kōrero with in New Zealand, the lucky country, Aotearoa land of divine poetry, of Papa Tuanuku and Rangi, lovers of land, sky and sea, progenitors of Māori, yes, New Zealand's a lucky country. Lucky the brothers were restless sons, lucky they warred when dark had won, lucky they longed for the light of the sun and the warmth of the open air. Lucky Tāne was the heart-led sun, seeking bloodless revolution. Lucky he had the strength to stand and pry his parents apart. Lucky the lovers loved so much, missing the caress of each other's touch, for Rangi cries tears from the sky so freely, and Papa's fecund soil so healing, giving us Tāne Mahuta's forests of jade green, rivers, lakes, underground springs, a green belt round this nation's hips, kissed all over by Moana's blue lips. From Te Waiponamu to Te Ika a Maui, green stone to fishtail, lucky, lucky country. See the Pahutakawa blush deeply, along cliff edges rising steeply, where the dead depart for Hawaii. From Cape Lianga to Raki Ura Sea, yes, New Zealand's a lucky country. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Did you want to say anything to kind of round up your kōrero?
I don't think I can. I just thank you.
Oh, that was so beautiful. I'm just like, you just forget how lucky we are sometimes, you know.
See, if you know enough poems, you don't have to actually say anything. Like,
yeah.
It's like...
Well, I think that brings us to the end of our kōrero for the evening, but thank you so much for joining us and sharing all of that beautiful knowledge and perspective and taonga and mātauranga and everything with us all here tonight. I'm sure I speak for all of us when I say I feel very refreshed, and you know, just thinking back to what you were saying at the beginning, Selina, about things can get so I guess clinical when you're dealing with, I guess, the everyday way of things, particularly like politics is very, well, it's not black and white, but it's, you know, it's very process driven and can get very compartmentalised, and just being brought back down to earth by being able to appreciate how lucky we are is a real privilege. So thank you, Iti Tuakana. Okay, so I'm going to close us off with a karakia for the end of the evening, which is about, I suppose it's just about clearing your heart and your mind and your body of the various things that might afflict you throughout the day, and I guess, yeah, just the day-to-day burdens that day-to-day life can bring on, and just letting those go and moving forward with a free heart and a free mind and a free body and soul. So yeah, mena tātou. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia ki te uru tapu nui. Kia wātia, kia māma, te ngākau, te tinana, te wairua, i te arataka tū. Koiara e rongo, whakairea ake ki runga. Kia wātia, ai rā, kua wātia. Have a great night.
Kia ora.